that the world is on notice for it. So I'm not going to dive deep into the copyright and trademark because I think you guys have a few more webinars coming up that are specific to that. So let's see. Number 2, choose an entity type. So there are several different types of entities that you can choose from. The most common are sole proprietorship. That means that you are working by yourself. You're the sole owner of the company, and you actually don't even have to register the company if you're going to be a sole proprietor. That being said, I'll still recommend that you do register the company. And that's for several reasons, but mostly to protect your personal assets. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but let me talk about the other different types of entities. So there's also partnerships. If there are 2 people, you can form a partnership. There's a limited liability company, an LLC. That is the most common, especially for companies of fewer people. And then there's corporations. So there's C Corps and S Corps, which is a more formalized entity structure. So I will get into the differences between all of them, and really what the most important differences are is 1, your liability, 2, the way that you're taxed, and then 3 is the administrative flexibility that you have depending on the type of company that you're forming. So I'm going to go through corporations and LLCs because those are really the most common and the ones that people have the most questions about, and kind of talk through the differences of those. So the first one for corporation and LLC is the liability of individuals. So generally, as long as you set things up correctly, your individual personal assets are protected. That means that if you have a creditor coming after you for anything based on your business, that they can't touch your personal assets. So that means that they can't come after your home or your car or your spouse's car or something like that. So as long as you're set up in a formalized way, then creditors cannot come after personal assets. So in terms of taxation, for an LLC, the profits and losses are directly to the members, unless you make a different election. So for corporations, they have what's called double taxation. So that means that you're taxed once on profits and then once on your income. So that's kind of the major difference. I always tell people to consult a tax professional before you're deciding what type of company to form, because it really depends on your individual situation. The third difference is the way that you're formed. So corporations are formed by what's called articles of incorporation, and LLCs are formed by what's called articles of organization. Neither of them are very difficult documents. They're just a little bit different in how they're worded. So again, you can file, so if you're wanting to form an LLC, what you would do is file your articles of organization with the State Corporation Commission, and it's basically a form that's filled out online after you submit all of your information. So it's pretty easy to do to form the company itself. The more, I guess, complex part of it comes with what's next on this list is the management. So in corporations, the management is centralized in a board of directors, and in an LLC, the management is done by the members. So that could just be yourself, or it could be if you have different partners, then you can set up a way of how it's managed. So for example, that is dictated by what's called an operating agreement. So if you're just by yourself, it's pretty simple and you're the managing member of your company. If you have other members, you can designate basically however you guys want to agree upon it, who has the operating power. You can all have operating power. It's really flexible because you can just basically do whatever you want to do in terms of management. But the thing that's going to be guiding that is the operating agreement itself. And we'll talk about that as well. So the other part of corporations that people don't like is that it requires continuing formalities. meaning you have to have meeting minutes every time you have a meeting. You have annual meetings that have to be documented, and there are certain things that you have to have a formal vote on if you want to change. So really substantial management decisions have to be voted on by the board of directors. Again, you can change those things based on your operating agreement, but there are formalities that are required for a corporation that aren't required for an LLC unless you add that to your operating agreement. So it's just kind of less of a hassle administratively to have an LLC than a corporation. So that doesn't mean one is better than the other. It's just kind of a decision that you have to make depending on the type of business you're going to be running. So we'll move on. Okay, so if there's one piece of advice that I can give you today, it is to do what's called avoid piercing the corporate veil. So that means that if you're going to formalize a company, make it a company and don't make it your personal, don't put it in your personal name. So this is basically what protects you from creditors accessing your personal assets. So this means you can't commingle your personal funds with the funds for the company. And you have to, if you have a corporation, you have to go through the required formalities. It's really important, and I think further on in this presentation we'll talk about it, but that you have a separate bank account for your business and your personal funds, because basically the whole point is that if a judge were ever to come and say, is this your personal account or is this your business account? And as long as they can distinguish the difference between the two, then nobody will be able to come after your personal assets. So that's why we always just say, formalize your LLC, do not commingle your funds, follow the formal requirements of a corporation, and then undertake necessary filings. There's just certain filings that happen annually that are associated with both. So we can move on. Okay, number 3, consult a tax professional. I cannot emphasize strongly enough that there are legal teams and there are tax professionals, and they're very different, and everybody has their own expertise. So we don't like to give out tax advice just because it's such a specialized field, and also it's really dependent on your individual situation. So regardless of, if you're thinking of starting your own company, if you have a CPA or somebody that you can talk to about the different options, you should be talking with them along with a lawyer if you're using a lawyer to start them. Okay. Number 4. So register with the State Corporation Commission. We do most of our work in Virginia. We also do DC and Maryland. So this website that I provided here is for the Virginia website. And it's really easy to do. You basically go online. It's the same with DC as well. They have really good instructions about how to get your company started. So what I always tell people is, you can try it yourself. We're happy to do it for you and help you along the way. But I think it's a good exercise to just go onto their websites and just read about what it takes to start your business and how to go about it. If you need help with it, you can always consult a lawyer with doing it. But I'm kind of the view of the more power to you, and artists and people that are starting their own company tend to be very entrepreneurial and that they want to figure things out themselves. So I'm kind of on the empowerment mode of go try it. If you need help, then you need to consult somebody, but you do need to register with the State Corporation Commission. The other thing that I will tell you is if you are doing business in multiple states, you may need to register your business in each one of those states. So it really depends on the type of work that you're doing and the state that you want to be either selling your work or just doing business in. But you should check with each state to make sure that you don't need to register if you're doing kind of like a multi-jurisdictional type of business. Okay. Number 5, obtain an EIN, employee identification number, from the IRS. So again, this is something you can easily do yourself. I've provided the link here below that you can register with. It just requires you to have a little bit of information. One, your name, the name of the company. You also will need to have your registered agent listed. But it's a free service that you can do with the EIN and honestly, or sorry, with IRS, and it only takes a few minutes to do. So again, something else that you can do by yourself. I forgot to mention that with the state filings, there are annual fees that you have to pay. In Virginia, I believe the filing fee is $100 to start the business, and then a $50 annual fee each year going forward to keep your business active. The EIN from the IRS is actually a free service, and there's nothing required, no fees associated with that. Okay. Number 6 is open up a bank account for the business. So I cannot stress enough how important it is to not commingle your personal funds with your business funds. It seems like an administrative hassle, but it's worth it in the end to make sure that, like I've said previously, that creditors or anybody that's filing a lawsuit against you are not going to be able to access your personal funds. The limit of your liability will be based on what the business is worth. So that's going to be calculated by a few things, but one of the big things that they'll look for is the actual bank account and how much is in there. So just make sure that you're not commingling funds, that anytime you sign off on anything, if you've started a company, that you're signing as, for example, if you have an LLC and you're the sole member, that you're signing as the sole member for the LLC and not as your personal name. So it really makes a difference, and it's literally the difference of just putting in the signature line that you're signing your name, comma, member, or comma, manager, whatever your title is for the organization. Okay. Number 7, obtain proper business licenses and permits. Each type of field has its own requirements of what licenses and permits you need. It does vary too if you're working from home. And again, that's something that you can research pretty quickly on your own if you go to your state's website. So in Virginia, there's something called the Business Professional Licensing Tax. So that's a separate tax that you have to pay if you're operating a business in Virginia. I believe there's a similar tax associated with DC. But again, you can visit your state or DC's website, and they provide a lot of really helpful information to kind of guide you through this process. It is helpful to consult with an attorney or a tax professional also to make sure that you're complying with everything. But again, I'm of the empowerment mode where there is so much information listed and available that you can take the time to kind of figure it out and then talk to somebody afterwards if you think you need more assistance. Okay, number 8 is get insurance. This is one thing that I think people don't actually think about. There is just general liability insurance that you can get. It also depends on your profession of what type of insurance that you need. It's not very expensive to just get general liability insurance, usually for small businesses. There are different insurances required depending on your expertise. So for example, for us, we have to get malpractice insurance, which is probably one of our higher costs in terms of operating. But for general liability insurance, it shouldn't be that expensive, but it's something that you just need to have. Again, it's a protection for your personal assets, that people can't come after your personal assets. and that you're covered if something were to happen. So always helpful to just consult with somebody and maybe get a quote of how much that would cost depending on what you're doing. Number 9, put contracts in writing. Again, this is one thing that I think people don't want to spend time on, are contracts, and I know that they're really boring. As someone who spends a lot of time reading and writing them, I agree with you that they're very boring, but they are really important. They basically govern the terms of everything that you're doing. So if you're selling anything to somebody, it governs the terms of that agreement between the two of you. I'm going to go through a list of the contracts that I think are the most important and the clauses that you want to make sure, if you have a contract, are included. I know a lot of people use LegalZoom and things like that now, which I would never, I'm not a huge fan of, but I know that it's out there and it's a cost-effective way for people. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go through the contract clauses that I think are most important, that you make sure, if you're using something like that, are included to protect yourself. So these are the most common types of contracts that you'll see if you're running your own business. So the first one we talked about a little bit is the operating agreement. So that basically governs the terms of how your business is run. So if you have a business partner or something like that, that will govern who can take control of assets, who is allowed to buy or sell things using the company assets, and how much profit and loss that you're sharing between the two of you. So even if you're a sole member of your company, I would still recommend getting an operating agreement, because that basically governs the terms of your company. So what happens if you don't have an operating agreement is that you default to whatever your state guidelines are. So that may not be a bad thing, but my recommendation is to have one in place, even if you're a sole business owner, because if you ever were to get in a lawsuit or something like that, the first thing that the judge is going to look at is, what is your operating agreement? And it also shows a judge or somebody like that, if you were to end up in litigation, that you are seriously a separate company other than your personal self. So again, it's another step in protecting your assets from any creditors or third-party people coming after you for anything, showing that you're a serious business and that your personal assets aren't at stake. The second type of contract that is usually the most common are services contracts. So this basically means any contract if you're selling any type of service or artwork or anything that governs the terms of how it's being sold, who is paying for it, how much you're paying, when the payment is due, those types of things. So services contracts are really the most common contracts we see, and it's basically the one contract other than the operating agreement that you need to have in place. The third one, employment contract. If you're working for somebody else or if you're hiring employees, you absolutely need to have an employment contract in place. So you'll see the next one says independent contractor agreement. So that means if you're not an employee, you're going to be an independent contractor, but you still need to have an agreement in place governing the terms of your relationship with whoever you're working for. So if you're going to be contracting with multiple businesses or something like that, independent contractor agreement is usually what they will share with you to sign. If they don't have you sign anything, you need to have your own one in place, because that's what's going to protect you and also protect them from anything that occurs, because it's basically, you can agree to whatever terms you want. You have that flexibility with these, but if you're contracting with someone, make sure they have one in place. If not, you should be providing your own. And that can also look like a general services contract agreement too. And then, let me see. Oh, lease. Yes, so I'm sorry, I'm just trying to figure out my screen here. Okay, so yeah, so a lease, basically, if I feel like those are less common nowadays because people are at home, but they used to be very common in terms of things that people are contracting or negotiating around. So yeah, nowadays I feel like it's not as needed, but if you do find yourself needing to rent out a space, make sure that the lease is well reviewed and that you're looking at all the terms of that kind of thing too. All right. So these are my top employment, or not employment, but top contract clauses that I think need to be reviewed and defined in every single contract that you have. So the most important things that you want to make sure are in your contracts are, first of all, how you get paid. So that's obviously a very important thing for everybody, but you need to make sure that it's very clear on how and when you're going to get paid. Define the fees very specifically. Add any late fees or things like that. A lot of time people don't think about adding late fees if payment isn't rendered by a certain date. So that's one of the most important ones. The second one is services. So this is to be clear about what types of things you're going to provide. And I'm always very specific on these about things that you do provide and things that you don't provide, because you want that to be clear and manage expectations about whatever the transaction is going to be. Well, the other one is termination and expiration. What happens when one party wants out of the agreement? Do you get paid? How do you get paid? Those are always things that you don't want to think about before you're entering into contracts, because you're looking at things and excited to enter them, but that's really an important one of what happens, how can you terminate a contract, who's getting paid, how much you're getting paid, on what circumstances coming out of the termination, and things like that. And also, you don't want to commit yourself to a time frame of something that goes beyond of what you're willing to do. So and then the next one is limiting your business's liability. So these are two clauses that you'll see in contracts, and I know this is really boring. I don't like talking about them, but I do feel like these are the most important things to have in your contract. So one is the indemnification clause. That basically says who is responsible for what at what point. So if, for example, you are paying somebody else to do some work for you and somebody sues you as a result of that person's work for you, then the indemnification clause allows you to be protected from work that somebody else has done for you. So you'll see these a lot at the end of contracts. They're usually on the last page, but they're one of the most important ones. And that's what that means. The other one is called a limitation of liability. That's another clause that you'll see in lots of contracts. And that basically, it normally says, and if you have one in your contract, you should make sure it says this, but it normally says that the limit of your liability on any service or anything that you're providing is based on the amount of service that you provided. So say, for example, you're selling a piece of artwork for, $500 and somebody sues you because of it, that limits your liability to just the $500. So that's usually how it works. Sometimes the limitation of liability says that it is reduced to the full amount of your business associated with your business. So you just want to make sure that whatever that clause says is what you're comfortable with. The last one, employee versus independent contractor, that you want to make sure that's clearly defined. So one, if you're hiring employees, you want to make sure that either they're employees or you're hiring them as contractors. And so the difference is really employees have way more benefits and are entitled to certain things that independent contractors aren't typically entitled to. And usually the difference is that an independent contractor has full flexibility to, one, make their own hours, provide their service, and that they're not being controlled in any way by the company itself. So let me, okay. And then number 10, this is just what we call a compliance checkup. So once you've been out on your own for a while and you've gotten started and you've kind of done all your filings and you're kind of going through everything, is that you just want to make sure that you're still in compliance with all of the taxes that are required, all the business licenses, and all the permits. So those are things like you want to be registered in all the states that you're dealing business in. So that's the kind of thing is what we call a compliance checkup, is if you're on your own and you've started everything and you've done everything on your own, and then you just want somebody to review to make sure that you're in compliance and that you're not going to get hit with any fees or taxes or something that you're unexpected or not expecting. That's why we always say do a compliance checkup, and usually we say annually depending on the business, but sometimes it doesn't need to be that much as long as you're administratively taking care of everything that you need to do. Okay, so I realize it's only 10:30, but that's all I had for everybody, and I'm happy to take questions and kind of go from there.
All right, folks, if you'd like to ask a question, you could either do it in the chat, or if you want to be shown, I can even like show your face. So if you go into the participants section, I think you can go into participants, you can raise your hand and I can turn your microphone on if you'd like to ask a question. There's a little, I do have a question already from Stephen Parker. Pros and cons of a sole proprietorship?
Okay. Yeah, so pros and cons of a sole proprietorship. The one thing about it is a sole proprietorship, you don't even actually have to register your business anywhere, and you can just kind of operate your business. The problem with that is that you're not then protected by the formalities that come with something like an LLC, meaning, again, the protection of creditors not being able to access your personal funds. So a sole proprietorship is definitely the easiest way to go about it because there's no formal documents that are required, but then you're not getting the protection that a formalized business would receive.
And you can turn your video on if you'd like, so people can see you.
That's very sorry.
Laura Beth raised her hand to ask a question. I'm going to unmute you. Laura Beth.
Yeah, hi there. Hi there. Thank you so much. My question is about products. So I'm kind of curious as far as how, because Mona, you were talking about contracts, which I definitely understand as far as like how and why those are important. How do you keep yourself liable for a product that you are selling, such as if you for example, I'm an artist that has a line of works that I offer, and so as opposed to individually handing someone a contract for a product, how do you make that whole interaction legal, like an actual legal interaction without like having everyone sign something when they're just purchasing a small piece or whatever it is from you?
So like if you have a line of work that you're selling to one person multiple times, is that?
Sure, I'll take that answer also, but I actually so it's more like if I have a product line that I'm offering to I mean, really, I'll just let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to say this right. So if let's say my business is offering candles.
Mm-hmm.
And so on, so I'm, whether it's a storefront or e-commerce, I'm selling candles to folks.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who, let's say someone who comes into my shop, right? I mean, it's just like any retail interaction, I guess, is really kind of what I'm asking about, really. Yeah, that's more of my question. Yeah, sorry. Okay, there we go.
No, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, so if it's just like a simple retail interaction, I don't think you need a formalized contract. That being said, if you do it the other way, which you're selling a line of work multiple times to one person, that's something that I would definitely have a contract for. But I do think it's probably excessive to just have a interaction a general contract for every time you're selling a candle.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just kind of why you have an invoice or something like that you're keeping. So you don't necessarily need a contract, but definitely an invoice that you're just keeping, one, for your own records, and two, just to kind of solidify the transaction, if that makes sense.
Sure. And thank you. Yeah. And so really, as long as there is documentation of the sale, then that is enough, I guess, as far as like having a legal contract for your product to keep you legally, liable, or protecting your liabilities.
Yeah, as long as you have a formalized company that you're selling everything through, then they shouldn't be able to, if some reason the product was bad and they wanted to sue you for it, that they shouldn't be able to touch your personal assets as long as you have a formalized company that you're doing it through, and then you're tracking, via invoice or whatever you're using to document the sales or things like that.
Okay.
All right, Laura Beth, we need to go on to somebody else. Thank you. All right, we have some questions in the chat and I do see some hands raised. So let me ask the questions in the chat. Where to go to check in your business name if your business name is unique?
So you'll go to the State Corporation Commission for wherever you're trying to file your business. So if it's in DC, you can search DC business entities, and it's a government website that you can pull up, and literally you just put in your name, and then it will tell you whether it's been registered or not.
Got it. And can you repeat what is SCC? You already said that. Sell artwork and need to register each art. Okay, you said that. Can you repeat the signature designation?
The signature designation. I don't know what that one was.
Jamie had asked that question. Let me find Jamie, unless Jamie wants to put it in the chat. Jamie. Find a participant. Jamie. Nope. Jamie. Oh. Darn it. Jamie, you want to ask your question?
Sole proprietorship.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The question I was trying to ask was, you had said with the signature under open a bank account in your business name and how to sign it if you're a sole proprietorship. And
Okay.
you were saying names, comma, blah, 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 blah. And I missed that.
Yes. So if it's the sole proprietorship, then you likely won't have a title. But if you have an LLC or a formalized company, then your title will be, if you're the sole member of your company, your title will be manager or sole member. It really depends on what's put into your operating agreement. But when you're signing off on anything that's business related, you want to make sure to have basically your name, comma, title on every signature, and that you're signing on behalf of the company, not as your personal self.
Okay, and so you make no mention of the company name.
Usually there is a designation that says, it'll say, whatever your LLC is. So S&T Law Group, comma, LLC, and then by, and it would be Mona Wilcox, comma, member.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Kylie has a question. Let me find Kylie.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, is that Kylie?
Yes, it is.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Mona. How are you?
Hi. Good. How are you guys?
I'm great. I have a question. I'm wondering if you could put me in touch with someone who I could talk to about what I do in particular. I'm an independent contractor who makes large scale props and puppets for events and theatrical companies. And I know who I'm talking to about my personal liability insurance, but I would love it if I could talk to someone who understands this particular type of work as to what I need to be putting in my contracts and things like that in order to protect myself from if someone is misusing something and gets hurt, because that's often very likely.
So you want to be put in touch with an attorney to review that, or
I think so.
insurance
I was
type?
just wondering if that brought to mind anybody in particular who understands that sort of work, because it's so specialized. I'm not entirely sure who to ask.
I don't know, but I can do some research and try to find somebody for you. I'd be happy.
Well, that would be excellent. I appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah,
All right.
I
Thank
will
you.
get back to you and see if I can find anyone that's specific. But if you wouldn't mind sending me an email at my email address there, just to remind me, and then I'll follow up with you.
I sure will. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Kylie. Let me see, go back to some more questions. There was something about somebody in a band. Hold up, there was something about somebody in a band. I'm in a band. We're an LLC, but thinking of becoming some proprietors. Musicians don't make much and our tax prep costs $1,500 per annum. Thinking of sole proprietor, lose limited liability, but could buy liability insurance for $300 to $500 PA. Bad idea?
That really depends on your appetite for risk, is what I would always say, is that, you have to weigh the cost of things, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to formalize the company based on your expenses, but you are losing that protection that you have. So you kind of need to make the call on, do you want to take the risk of, how likely is it that somebody will sue me for something that I'm doing? How much would that actually cost? If, what I like to say, you like to think about, and this is a terrible place that lawyers live in, but what's literally the worst possible scenario that could happen, and decide if you're okay with that. And if you are, then it may make sense to, not have the formalities of the company. But again, that's what the risk that you want to take is. As long as you know your options, then you can make an informed decision about it.
Thank you very much. Next question from Ellen. My husband has a salaried job, but I don't have a salaried job and earn money from art selling. Can I file tax without his salary?
That would be a question for your tax professional. I think so. Taxes are always just so individually, it changes. So that I can't really answer, but I think you should consult with a tax person. Sorry.
Okay. Are there any more questions out there? You can put it in the chat or raise your hand. Oh, is that Laura Beth again? Laura Beth, I think. Or did Laura Beth already ask her question? Maybe she did. I see little hands, so I don't know if they
I can't see the
go away or not.
Jamie again, I'm sorry. Is there any way to get a link for the entire presentation?
We will be uploading these to our YouTube. Don't ask me when, because it depends on our video editor. So they will be uploaded to our YouTube at some point in time.
What I'm saying is what Mona prepared, a link to her slide presentation.
Mom.
Yeah, I'm happy to share it, and I guess we can figure out the best way to get it to everybody that participated, but I'm happy to share the presentation.
Yeah, we can send that through Eventbrite.
Okay.
All right, are there any other questions out there? in chat land? Oh, here's another one. Could you please discuss how to register an e-commerce business?
So again, it depends on the business, but you need to register with the state that you're going to be basically where you're going to be working out of. So that's the jurisdiction that you should look to register with first. And then depending on the type of business, then you may need to register with other states if you're selling in different places. There are some exemptions that will allow that you don't have to register if you're selling in a bunch of different states, but it really depends on the type of business and where you're looking to kind of have your home base.
Is there any other questions out there in the chat? Ellen, do you have another question? Ellen, you have another question? I see your hand raised. I don't know if it went away or not. Ellen? Maybe not. Okie doke. All right. Hearing no. Oh, wait a minute. Is she? Hold up. Okay, I tried to set up LLC, but then tax jar might. Oh, somebody said tax jar might be a good resource.
I'm not familiar with tax jar. I don't know that.
Oh, okay. So Ellen's question was, I tried to set up LLC, but then I do not make much salary for a full year. Is it worth to keep up?
Again, I think it depends on your appetite for risk of, you know, one, there are going to be filing fees annually that you're going to have to pay. So you need to kind of take into consideration what are the expenses that are required each time to keep your business going. Also knowing that, you know, depending on, again, I just, you know, what's the worst case scenario of something that could happen. So I would advise to keep a formalized LLC unless it's, you know, something that you're really not making any money off of at all, or if your expenses are just, if it doesn't make sense. But if you have the ability to keep it formalized, and you're thinking of growing in any way, I would always recommend to have a formalized company.
When does it make sense to dissolve? Oh, no. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I am on mute. I'm not on mute. When does it make sense to dissolve a legal partnership or LLC?
Again, it really depends on the situation. So if you are in a partnership and you're not happy, if you don't have an operating agreement, then the way to dissolve it is going to depend on the state that you're in. If you have an operating agreement, and that's why I like having them in place, then that dictates how you're going to dissolve your LLC. You know, what happens with who gets what, you know, when the company is formally dissolved. So it really just depends on, is it working? Is it not working? And if it's not working, then if you don't have an operating agreement in place, then you have to figure out, based on where you are, what the process would be to dissolve.
You said thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. Do we have any more questions? We can let y'all go 11 minutes early.
Yeah, that's always good.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm always happy to answer quick questions, and good luck, everybody.
Thank you all so much. As again, we will have this uploaded to our YouTube at some point. So we thank the ASL interpreter, Kristina Martinez, and we thank Mona Wilcox, and appreciate you all for your time.
All right, thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I want to deep condition. This is